The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The Gospel of the Lord. Found an interesting story in a publication called Ode Magazine. This is from the May 2009 issue. Municipalities, corporations, and public institutions, not to mention our families and households, are struggling to survive in the midst of the current recession. Too often, survival has meant massive job cuts and layoffs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics back in May, 4.4 million Americans have lost their jobs since the economic nosedive began. But some organizations have responded to the economic crisis by seeing their people as the solution to the crisis rather than the problem. 3 examples. Number 1, facing a crippling budget deficit with more than half of the fiscal year still to go, a New York municipality ordered a series of layoffs. Among the casualties were 6 firefighters, including a young man who had recently rescued several children from a burning apartment building. But the members of the firefighters union voted to work 1 day for free and delay promotions to keep the 6 positions funded. Number 2, an international law firm faced laying off junior staff. Rather than losing talented young associates, the senior partner set up a public service fellowship. Associates could take 1 year to do pro bono work for a nonprofit organization or a public service project of their choosing. During the year-long fellowship, attorneys would receive about 1/3 of their salaries and keep their benefits. At the end of the year, the associates had the option of returning to the firm full-time. And finally, instead of mandating layoffs and cuts, the president of a major Boston hospital asked its 6,200 employees for their ideas. They responded responsibly and enthusiastically to the challenge. At a series of brainstorming meetings, hospital employees came up with a plan that saved 450 jobs by cutting pay, reducing benefits, and trimming other costs. The hospital's president set the example by taking a 10% pay cut and declining a 30% bonus that was a part of his contract. That's how we do things in America. That's why this nation is so great. And I think as this economic recession continues to unfold, we are nowhere out of the woods. I don't care about the little optimistic blurps you hear and a bump up in the stock market here and there. We've got a few years yet to deal with this situation because it's huge. But I think at the same time, we're going to see more and more stories like that, of people caring about their brothers and sisters in need and doing something concretely to help them. And that brings us to our gospel today. It's another passage that appears in multiple texts. We find it in Luke 9, Matthew chapter 14, and once again here we hear from Mark chapter 6. And you remember a couple of weeks ago when we began hearing from that action-packed chapter 6 of Mark's Gospel, he really puts a lot of information in there. In verse 1, Jesus left the western region of Palestine and made a beeline up north to his hometown of Nazareth, where he entered the house of prayer called the synagogue. And you remember the reaction of the hometown crowd. They resented him. There was this gossiping and rumoring going on among the people. You know, who does this person? Who did you? And one of them just outright says, who does he think he is? Where does he get all this stuff? Very snotty and cynical towards the Lord. Well, Jesus' reaction is he was so hurt by this, by their lack of faith, that Mark tells us he could perform very few miracles in his own hometown. And so he leaves that area. He gathers the 12 apostles. Remember last Sunday's gospel. He gives them instructions and authority to witness to the kingdom of God by witnessing to him. He sends them out in pairs, and he warned them, beware. They rejected me. They could reject you as well. And you remember he advised them, when they went to someone and they refused to listen to them, take off your shoes and shake the dust off your feet as a judgment against them, says Jesus. Now in our gospel, the disciples come back after being out on mission. And although they don't give us a list of what they accomplished, they obviously are excited. Good things happened in the name of Jesus while they were out there. The Lord's response? He snatches them away and takes them to a deserted place. They need a rest. They all need a rest. But unfortunately, that ain't going to happen. No sooner than they get there, throngs of people come reaching after Jesus. They all want a piece of him, it seems. He can't even get a break. And look what he does. In a very powerful scene that we only find echoed in one other place, in John chapter 11, when Jesus has just found out that his dear friend Lazarus has been killed. Jesus now has another show of emotion. The translation here is actually a little bit weak. Greek into English is tough. We're told that Jesus has pity on this crowd. Actually, the Greek word behind that, splagna, means that he was moved from his bowels, from his guts. You see, the ancient Greeks believed that emotions had nothing to do with the brain. They were all centered in your guts. And when Mark writes that Jesus was moved as his guts, he means Jesus was just torn apart with deep emotion for these people. What did he see that made him feel that way? There was something on their faces that made the Lord remorseful for these people. And so he will echo some words that we hear in the book of Numbers chapter 27 verse 17 and the first book of Kings chapter 22 verse 17. We're told that Jesus looks at them and he thinks they are like sheep without a shepherd. But the Lord is not going to let it stay that way. Reminiscent of the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, verse 15, when God himself will say to Ezekiel, go tell my people, I myself will now be your shepherd, and I will have my people lie down and rest. And that's exactly what Jesus does. The people find rest in him because he is teaching them with authority. What's the point of this passage for us? First of all, who are these bad shepherds? It depends on where you go in the Bible. If you go to the Old Testament, for instance, the word shepherd has a different meaning than it does in the New Testament. The old shepherd, pure and simple, it referred to the people called shepherds as the kings. You see, what happened was God had appointed these kings. He sent prophets to go anoint them and to tell them to lead his people. They were his earthly messengers, if you will. But no sooner than the kings went to the throne, they were focused on three things: power, money, and prestige. They would tax the people into the point of slavery in order to build up their big building projects and to amass huge armies for their enemies. Oh yeah, but the thing that the kings did that the Lord found absolutely unacceptable, they neglected the needs of three types of people that the prophets tell us were closest to the Lord's heart: the poor, the widow, and the orphan, the most helpless and vulnerable members of society back then. The Lord would get rid of the kingship in time. When we go to the New Testament, it's a whole nother issue. You see, the Romans are in charge. The Romans only have one leader, and that is Caesar, sitting back in Rome. They allowed Herod to be a puppet king. He was something like a representative to the Jewish people, but he really had no power in the midst of Roman occupation. The people that were the bad shepherds during Jesus' day were the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious teachers, the religious lawyers. And what did they do that the Lord found objectionable? They went to the Old Testament, and their initial motivation was good. They wanted to answer the question, what must I do to get it to heaven? We all want that. We all want to be in heaven someday. And so they went to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They extracted 613 commandments, and then they would build commandments on top of each of those commandments. To literally, there were thousands of commandments. They said that you had to obey to the letter of the law if you had a chance to make it to heaven. But there were some problems. You had to go to the rabbis to get the information. And the way you got to be a part of the rabbi's group, his disciples, was usually you were a part of a family whose father and grandfather and great-grandfather had studied under this particular rabbi and in his descendants. And so you had to know somebody, so to speak. Sounds like Southern West Virginia politics. And then you had to be able to read and write. What if you couldn't? There was no Borders bookstore to go to buy a book to just do your own self-knowledge. You could not go online and Google the information you needed. No, there was one source, and if you couldn't get it from there, guess what? You felt shut out. You felt totally shut out. And so Jesus is seeing these people, and he's looking at this forlorn, despaired look on their faces, and he does not like it. He's going to take care of his people. He is going to be the shepherd, and he takes care of their needs for sure. What about today? There are a lot of people who are lost. People who have been disappointed by government leaders, religious leaders, and so on and so on. But more often than not, people have taken it upon themselves to find happiness and peace in this life. And as that song that was sung a lot back in the 70s, they were looking for love in all the wrong places. People have been looking in all the wrong places. They've gotten bottlenecked on the road in a little place called materialism, where they feel that the more they have, the more they possess can make them happy and give them peace. But they're always ending up unsatisfied. People end up in forms of materialism, such as the addictions, because it seems to take their pain away. But it doesn't. And so a lot of people, and an increasing number, are lost out there. They are lost. How do I experience that? Well, it's amazing, being a Catholic priest, you really do have that experience of being hemmed in by people sometimes. Sometimes it's difficult to get a break. And I remember I was sharing a humorous story some time ago with a group of people about one time going to a Kroger store. And I knew it was a mistake before I even got in the truck to go. I needed a head of lettuce. I should have gone early in the morning, but I ended up going on a Sunday after all the masses were done. Big mistake. I made it to the lettuce section in the produce aisle, only to have a guy come up and say to me, "Are you a priest?" To which I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can you hear my confession?" It really, at first, struck me as, I've never heard a confession among the endive, but that's okay. First time for everything. What had happened was the guy had spent a week up at Ogilvy Park at that resort for a business conference. He was getting ready to fly back. He had to go to Pittsburgh to catch his flight to head back to where he was from. Something happened during that week that made him feel the need to go to confession. He sees a Catholic priest buying lettuce or no lettuce. There's his chance. And so we went into the imported food section, because usually there's not a lot of traffic there. And I heard his confession. That actually happened. Back when this Mass, the 11:15 Mass, was the 11 o'clock Mass, so it was several years ago, I counted one time the number of times people stopped me from the time I left the front door of the rectory to go to the back of church to get ready to start the procession. 14 times. Some of it was kind of frivolous questioning, but most of it was serious information. People wanted answers to questions. 14 times. What am I saying to you? I'm not complaining. That's why I'm here. That's why the Lord called me to this ministry. And I'm very grateful that the Lord gave me the opportunity of a good education. You paid for it. You're the one who put me through the seminary. And I took advantage of that, and I'm grateful that I did, because with my experience plus the tools, the information that I gathered, I've been able, I think, to really help bring peace to people. But there ain't enough of me to go around. What does that mean? Guess what? If you looked in the mirror this morning, then you know what I'm talking about. The Lord is calling each of us to go out there and minister to His people. Now, the great news here in this parish, there are a number of people who are doing just that, and doing it beautifully. One of the things that impresses me so much about this place that I did not see when I was up north was the number of people who take the time to go to the hospital to visit our sick people. I hear it all the time, and what a wonderful thing that is. People who take time to minister to people who are grieving, who have lost a family member or a loved one very near and dear to them. I know sometimes you feel inadequate. Well, I don't have a theology degree. You don't need one. I'm not holy enough. Who is? There are no excuses. People are needy, and they are growing in their need, and the number of them is growing. If not you and me, then whom? The Lord is using us and calling us to be His shepherds to His people, to be that voice, that comforting voice that can give them what the world does not have. Mother Teresa composed a prayer a number of years ago, and it was a prayer basically describing Jesus talking to His people. And it said, Jesus says, "I have no hands but your hands. I have no eyes but your eyes. I have no lips but your lips. I have no heart but your heart." Or in other words, He works through each and every one of us. Each time you reach out to one of those people out there who is lost, you're doing it for Jesus Himself. So my brothers and sisters, I pray in a special way for all the people who are searching out there. They are in the majority. But I pray also that God will use you and your hearts. May He fill you with compassion for these people and use you to minister to them and to bring them a peace that only the Lord can bring.